welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be playing the London system. Normally I play knight to f3, move 2, but I'm actually going to switch it up. Bishop to f4. We're doing roughly one video per... Ooh, they play e6, which makes me want to consider knight c3. The Yobava system with like knight b5 and stuff. Let's not go too crazy. Let's go e3. Anyways, yeah, so we're doing roughly one game per 100 points. So there's going to be about 14 videos, or yeah, 14, because we start at 600. So for every 100 point group. Yeah, anyways, so we're just developing naturally. It makes sense to develop our king side, but I'm also happy developing my queen side. Moves like b3 are interesting, but I'm a little scared of moves like bishop a3 to b2. So I want to make sure that I'm not falling for anything there. We could also try b4, but I don't think we need to. Yeah. b3 would be nice, though, if we can start attacking the center a bit. So b3, bishop to a3, we take on c4. They go bishop b2, rook b1, they take, and then we can take on d5 as well, which is interesting. But let's just focus on development, shall we? Natural moves. Knight f6, bishop to e2, we'll castle, and then we'll consider some queenside expansions. Okay, h6. They might go g5. Feels like that's what they're intending. I'm not really too scared of it, though. That's why I ended up castling anyways. Bishop d6. Okay. So we have two options. We can go bishop g3, or we can take. Both options are good, as they don't really give away any material. And right now, at 1100, I'd say the biggest thing you have to worry about is making sure you're not actually hanging your pieces. So bishop g3 does feel pretty good, because if they take it, we can actually take with the h-pawn and take towards the center, which is quite nice. If we take on d6, however, we are developing one of their pieces for them, so that is another thing to consider. However, if we look at it, we do want to play this move b3, right? And my biggest fear was this bishop a3 to b2, but after taking and queen takes, now b3, all of a sudden there's no queen a3. Queen a3 doesn't really make much sense. So I like taking because of that specific move b3. However, otherwise I would choose the move bishop g3. So b3. And if they take, we'll take towards the center, prepare moves like c4, and we'll get a bunch of center space. So when they play b5 in these types of positions, there's this special move a4. And we're essentially just trying to chip away at their center, where if they take, we will take back, and what they're left with at the very end is a position where, how do I put this, they just have a weak a-pawn, and we still have the c4 break, chipping more away at their center. It feels like the a7 pawn will be a weakness if these pawns come off the board. Yeah, so this doesn't really work. And try to calculate why if you can. So, generally when you're calculating at this rating range, what you want to do is calculate checks first, capture second, and then threats third. These are just captures. So we capture on b5, they have to capture back. We capture on c4, but as we can see, they only have 2 defenders. And once they recapture, we can actually take on c4 with the knight, pawn takes, and then bishop takes, and we actually win a pawn. So we'll take on b5. We'll take on c4. They could go pawn takes, but either way, I was going to play knight takes. And yeah, I don't think there's any reason to take with the bishop over the knight. Knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes does feel like the better option. keeping the bishop. Generally, if you can, the bishops are nicer, but at this rating range, you don't need to keep the bishops at all times. It's just nice to have a bishop versus a knight, because especially right now, there are still pawns on both sides of the board. One thing I'm considering is e4, e5. So I'll go queen c2 here. Actually, queen d2 might even be better. The reason why is because queen c2, if they play rook fc8, they have knight b4. Which is only trades, but at the same time, I think queen d2 might be a little bit safer. And I still want to go e4, e5 here. Yeah, so they start pushing. I could consider c4, c5, which is another good option. And the idea behind that is that we're trying to advance this this pawn that's not really opposed to anything, but it's unclear what it's doing after it gets to c5. So despite it being an extra pawn, right, because we are up a pawn, I'm not exactly sure what we want to do with it. There's this funny move here, bishop e4, which has the intention of playing c4, and then let's say knight f6, maybe c5. If they take, we can actually just take on d6 here, takes, and then knight c4 to defend the pawn. That's maybe too complicated. But I'm seeing lines that I like, essentially, with bishop to e4. Where I'm trying to play c4, and then take on c6. So this is a part where I don't mind actually trading it off, because we might win this pawn as a result. c4. They might go knight b4 instead. And then I'll still consider this move c5. Okay, and this actually helps me a bit. Because now we have to consider, do I want to take? Or do I want to just move back and say they created a huge weakness? I think both are reasonable. I'm going to move back. Oh, but taking looks good too. I'm going to move back. We've provoked f5, and I think that is a big concession. So we can now consider e4, and then getting pretty much the exact same position again, except now the e pawns and f pawns have been traded, so they just have this weakness on e6, which is beneficial to us. Because, well, they have an isolated pawn. They have an isolated pawn here. Okay, so they keep pushing it. I'm not really too concerned. This pawn doesn't get that far. So e4 looks good. c4 looks reasonable. I could also go rook to a2 and try to double up and just win the pawn. They can go a3 if they want, but I'm just going to go rook a1. It would be nice to play c4 now, to try to play c5 to cut off the connection of the queen to this pawn, but there is actually a problem with that move. The problem is, if we play c4, then they have knight b4, attacking the rook. Okay, this feels a bit too aggressive for them. I could try queen c1. I'm failing to see how they defend this pawn. That does look effective. It also gives me a square for my knight, so if they play g4 or something, I can just move the knight back. Yeah, let's play queen c1, right? Simple moves. We're just trying to take this pawn off the board. And once this pawn comes off the board, all of their counterplay is gone, right? Knight to b4 is really interesting. I don't think it works, though. We take it, knight takes, and we actually probably just give up the exchange. We don't give up this bishop. This bishop's too strong. Okay, and here I would like to play e4. Try to close things down over there. Make sure that there's no crazy attack. So again, if some sort of knight b4 takes, I'll just centralize my queen, like queen c3 or queen d2, and they can take on a2, but the thing is, it's 2 pieces for a rook, and generally the 2 pieces will be better. We still have to be a little careful. Now we have e5. And this wins a piece, right? Attacks both the queen and the knight. And not only does e5 win a piece, but we're still winning this pawn at the end of the day. Yeah. And in this case, we can take with the pawn or the knight. I actually prefer taking with the knight. So the thing is, if we take with the pawn, they can take on d3, and then we take on f6. But if we take with the knight, it's unclear what their next move is. We're taking on a3 next. We know what our plan is. Yeah, so noticing that pawn takes, we do drop the bishop. But it's not really like dropping the bishop, it's more like we're trading the bishop for the knight on f6. I just think that this bishop is worth more than this knight on f6. And we're ready to take on a3. Yeah, so we want to be careful. If we take on a3 immediately, then they can take on e5, and our d7 or d3 bishop would be hanging at the end of the day. So what we're going to do is we're going to take on d7 first. And then we're going to take on a3. So they could play f3 here to try to make things a little bit crazy. But the thing is, I looked at this and I saw this move g3. And normally you should be a little scared to play these moves. I expect, okay, that's fine as well. You should be a little bit scared to play those moves, mainly because if the queen gets to h3, you could find yourself lost. But luckily, that's not going to be the case for us, mainly because our light square bishop can go back to f1, and it covers all of these light squares that could be weak. So I'm just going to take on h6. We can always follow up with some sort of bishop to f1. And this should be winning. Another move I like is h3, trying to start breaking down these pawns. But I think trading queens first may be a bit better. Because if we can trade queens, then there's never any worries of our king being a little weak. Like, our king is technically a little weak still. It's just that their king is weaker and we're up material. So we know we're winning. But noticing these tactical themes of, hey, this king is not 100% safe, means that you should be on the lookout for any tactics involving the king, whether it's a check on the back rank or, like, for example, if they check on the back rank somehow and we play bishop f1, and then they add another attacker, we could find ourselves losing the game. But it's very difficult to find a way in which they can organize their pieces to create that attack, which is important. If e5, I'm thinking this move rook a6. I'm still thinking rook a6 anyways, because I'm trying to get the rook over to the king. And again, I'm banking on the fact that I'm not worried of covering the first rank that much, because we always have this bishop f1. I'm trying to think of other things to mention here, but I'm struggling to come up with other things to talk about. Yeah. I guess one thing to point out is actually, no, it's hard to play rook b8, rook b1 because rook b1 is actually covered by my bishop. Dang. Yeah, that doesn't really work either, does it? So rook a6 isn't even necessary, I just realized. We could play rook a5. Because the 5th rank is completely open. We don't need to waste time with taking on e6 and then going g6. We could just go rook a5. Which is going to g5, and that's... I don't think you can stop that. So if they tried to trade queens here... generally, I think it's okay to trade pieces and go into a position where it's, you know, you're just up a ton of material. And I think it's fine here as well. However, it's also quite reasonable just to go back to e3, for example, and continue on with attacking the king. Because, again, it's still pretty hard to find lines where they can find sufficient defense. And I think the game will be ended quicker in these cases. Whereas if we trade queens, for example, queen g7 and takes, our king is kind of out of the game a little bit. And not only do we have to worry about if we bring our king out, like, you know, of any back rank stuff, but after we do, these pawns are quite close to promotion. So we would probably want to deal with them immediately with some sort of like h3. Which, of course, is a winning idea, just to break up this pawn structure and then start picking up the pawns. But also, I think it's just quicker to keep the queen on and go for moves like rook a5, g5. Looks like my opponent's going to run out of time. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but that's okay. And I think that's going to cover it for the game. Cool. So... let's look at a little bit of the game and the analysis board, yeah? So, let's point out one thing in the opening that I was mentioning before. Whenever your opponent goes for these c4 moves, generally, I'm inclined to say they're not really that great. And, it's because they're taking on a lot of space that they might not be prepared, development-wise, to defend. So, one thing that I was thinking is, what if I try some sort of b3? But you have to consider this move bishop a3, which might not look crazy smart, but it's still something to consider. It would be more annoying if the bishop were on f5 for them instead, because then we wouldn't have this rook b1 resource. So you might actually see this quite a bit in some London systems if they get their bishop on f5. So do be quite scared of playing b3 there. But other than that, when they offer the trade, this b3 move comes into play really nicely, where we can just start breaking down their center. And I have a question. If they play a6, what's wrong with this move? Can you find a way to punish it? Yes. I'm sure you got it right. We can just take on b5, because the rook is actually opposing the other rook, and when we take on b5, if their rook's not defended, it's just winning a pawn. You'll see this on a lot of queen pawn opening positions, so be aware of this. And of course, now we're completely winning. The knight has to move away. We could take on a6, then c4. Everything just liquidates. Like, I'll just... that's not... Maybe this is a little bit better. And then, like, rook takes, bishop takes, and then we take on c4. So they don't even have the counterplay of the a pawn in this position. And we're just completely winning. We're just up 2 pawns, these guys. So, you know, that's a huge deal. So bishop a6 we take, and we take on c4, which is the punishment. They didn't have enough defenders of the c4 pawn. And that's the problem, again, with playing these c4, b5 moves a little too early. So, yeah, if they could have played a6 and had their rook defended, then it would have actually been okay. But, yeah, there was one other point that I was thinking about here of like knight b4, for example, which we have to consider, even though it looks a little stupid. The reason why is because after takes, knight takes, our bishop and our rook is hit. So we do have to deal with this in a somewhat appropriate way. And now I'm seeing, so originally I was thinking we have to just move this guy, but rook a3 works, doesn't it? It does. Because the problem is we're actually defending d3 with the rook. And there's no discovery because then we just move our rook or, you know, take on a8. So even if they take on a3, there's still no good discovery because, well, we're defending the rook. So that's actually something that I should have seen in the calculations. But yeah, so f4, e4, and e5 was nice to win that piece. Knight takes d7, queen takes, and once we get rid of that piece on the or the pawn on the queen side, then things just become a lot simpler for us. So yeah, again, this is completely winning, and yeah, that's game. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and maybe learned something along the way, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye-bye.